Okay, let's do this.
We're back.
Okay, so we're back. Welcome back, everyone.
Back.
We are back. Welcome back to episode 7 of Product Champs.
We took a week off.
Lucky 7, which, for a long time was a weekly get together. And now in this last week, we took a little hiatus. We took a little break. I think we came back or coming back refreshed, bushy tailed. I mean, Samir looks like he got sleep. So I think legitimately.
Okay. I just want to say there's one of our listeners always comments on the fact that I need a haircut.
Yeah.
And I keep on promising them that I'm
going
to get it. No, it's not my mom. It's a friend of mine. But and then every time I say I'm going to get it by the next episode, and then I haven't done it. But I did get some sleep. So, yes.
Okay. So we're back. We're refreshed.
We're back.
Let's do quick intros. We'll do a recap, and then we'll dive into this week. So I'm DZ.
I'm Avi.
Ahmad, we always go at the same
Ahmad.
time here, so you gotta go.
Okay,
you gotta go
all right,
first.
all right. My name is Ahmad.
Okay.
I am Samir.
This is way harder than it needs to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so just as a quick recap for folks, this is our weekly get together to talk about products, talk about life, talk about career choices. Last time's episode 6, was about how to be effective as a product manager. Prior to that, we talked about failure. We talked about becoming a product manager. We talked about the job itself. And I thought we did a really good job getting into the nitty gritty, like what day to day, makes a difference and what can make difference over time in terms of getting something done. So go listen to episode 6 for folks who have not. This week, actually, we want to pick up on a topic that we brought up. I can't remember which episode, but we talked about, I think Samir, you talked about sort of riding these S curves, right? Like if you are at the end of the S curve and you don't know it, boy, you're in for a bad time. Or conversely, if you're super, super early, as you might have been in whatever year that was, trying to build a touchscreen,
Right.
Operating system, if you're just super, super early in the S curve, you're also kind of screwed. And so we want to talk about trends. Specifically, there's 2 trends. Hopefully this will be a repeat episode. There's actually, I think, many more than 2 that matter. But specifically, there's 2 trends that are, one is very topical, and I think one is under talked about, especially in the US. So the first trend we want to get into is about Bitcoin. And the second trend we want to get into is about China. 2 very different trends on very different timescales, but I think will lead to lots of interesting learnings.
Yeah.
So let's.
By the way, DZ, I love that you do our intro, because we can just sit here and
it's pretty good, right?
benefit from you
It's
doing
so
it.
good.
Yeah, I just
think
winged this.
about this stuff before,
No,
or are you just radioing it right now? Are you doing it live?
Yeah, more or less, yes.
Okay.
I mean, when did I have
it's
time to
almost-
prepare, right?
It's
put it
almost
this
like
way.
you went to a really, really good school.
Yeah. Which school did you go to, Avi? I forgot. Which school
Yeah,
prepares him
it's-
for this?
Massachusetts,
Oh,
MIT.
Massachusetts.
MIT.
Yeah,
MIT.
Right. Okay. Well, that's
Rhymes
why
with
he's so
bit.
smart.
Rhymes
Yeah.
with bit. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
we got-
glad we did it early this time.
Yeah, we got it early. I got it
Got it
early.
out of the way. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into it. So let's talk about Bitcoin. Let's talk about China. Let me just tee this up real quick. I looked up the stats right before this. So in September of 2016, the total valuation of Bitcoin was 10 billion. Okay, just remember these numbers. 10 billion. 3 years later, September 2019, it was 150. So 15x, right? Right now, it's around 900 billion. By the way, I'm only including Bitcoin. I'm not including the whole.
And it had
space.
reached $1 trillion at some point. So
That's
you can
right.
just
Yeah,
count that,
exactly.
and it's close
Yeah,
enough. Yeah.
Sure, close enough. So roughly
Yeah.
speaking, in so 10, 150, 900. Let's just call it 10. Let's just call it a 20x
Yeah.
growth over about 5 years, right? That's what we're talking about here. This used to be a weird, frankly, maybe it still is to some people, a weird little side project that nobody understood. I think it still might be a weird side project to lots of
It's
people.
not, man. It's
But
not.
it is a real scale, right? This
Yeah.
is really
Yeah.
scaled up. Let's talk about it. Let's hear some early thoughts about like where are we with
And
Bitcoin?
can we admit that none of us are technically competent about this subject at all? That
100%.
Yes,
We're
100%.
Yes.
we are the classic traditional PM, don't really know what we're talking about, but talking about it anyways on this topic here.
That's exactly what we're doing.
with only one data point too.
Yeah, with
just
one data point. Yeah.
From one data point, look, all you need is 2 dots for a trend, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're
We've established
convincing
a trend.
though.
We are good.
So
Look,
what was the last number you gave in terms of
900 billion. So we're around 900 to let's call it between 900 and a trillion. I think the exact numbers don't really matter, but we went from 10 billion, which is kind of rounding error, right, in the world, to plus or minus $1 trillion in 5 years. That's real. Like your parents will talk to you about this at this point, right?
Yeah.
So where are we?
Okay.
What are your thoughts? And I think just to make sure we get to the point, like as a PM, as someone who's building products in the world, as someone who's looking for problems, we talked about all this stuff in the past. What should the typical PM be thinking about as they look at this?
Okay, let me start off with some real world experience here. So I lost a lot of money on Bitcoin when I panic sold once, but I also made some money on Bitcoin, I guess paper, because I haven't sold yet. So it would be interesting. It'd be good for us to sort of just go around and be like, did you dabble in this, and when did you dabble in this since? Because for me, I actually heard about it from someone that got into it, I don't know, like maybe 2016 or something. And they had done phenomenally well. I was extremely intrigued by how a digital file could make you so rich. And sadly did not put in anything until 2017. Bought one Bitcoin. DZ, I remember telling you about it in our little pod in Mountain View. Saw it go from 5,000 to 20,000, crash back down to 4 or whatever that crash was. It, crashed later, and then just forgot about it until it recently now went up to 64,000, and then now at 48. So I've been through a lot of the wild swings, and there's one thing that's interesting is that there's a lot of psychology involved here, because every time it drops, I get scared that it's going to go to zero. And then every time it's rising, I'm like, I got to buy more. And guess what? Next time it drops, I'm going to buy even more. And then when it drops, I'm like, this is going back to zero. So why I'm not going to buy. So it's a very,
this is a good way to start. So let's just talk about how we all learned about the thing, and then where we are personally. And then actually let's get into like what you so I learned about this a totally different way. There was a bunch of smart people that I worked with at LinkedIn who all went to Coinbase in 2018, right? Actually, no, I think they went in 2017, right? So I had left LinkedIn, I'd gone to Google. A year later, they had a cohort of them had gone off to Coinbase. Really smart people. Some of the really foundational people that built, especially the monetization side of LinkedIn as it is today. And so I was like, if all these smart people are going to Coinbase, maybe I should go learn more about Coinbase, right? Didn't do a damn thing. I mean, like the signal was there. In fact, I had a conversation with my ex-boss who went to Coinbase and now leads their data team about this. And it just didn't dawn on me at the time to like look into this further. So, the thing smacked me in the face, so to speak, in 2018, and me being completely oblivious, missed all the signs. I later then bought some, I want to say in 2019 or 2020, not much, just enough to like force myself to, participate and like start paying attention. So that's my get hit in the face by something and then don't read any of the signs and miss it altogether story. Avi.
So I think this story is appropriate for the pod, but the way I first heard about Bitcoin was a friend of mine was using Bitcoin in the early 2010s to purchase illicit materials. So
which should not be mentioned.
Which should not be mentioned. But it was kind of like
you went first, Avi, because I have almost the exact same story, but I was going to use far more explicit terminology.
Okay, so
tell us. Keep going. Tell us the story.
So basically, this friend was able to exchange like CVS gift cards to buy Bitcoin, and it was essentially a way to do this anonymously and order these illicit materials by mail without being traced back. So it was interesting to me because it was like a system where it's like, oh, like here's actually this unit of money, and where some of those original properties of Bitcoin were actually serving him well, right? And it kind of piqued my interest. Then The second time I got exposed to Bitcoin was when I was working in the movie industry, and I came across this fascinating story of this guy named Ross Ulbricht, I think is how you say his name, who had built this underground website called the Silk Road. And it was essentially the eBay of, again, illicit materials, right? But you could buy anything. You could do so anonymously. You could buy anything from passports.
You wouldn't know, Avi. You've
I
just
would
heard.
not
That's
know.
what I want
I
to
had
make
just
sure. Yeah, you only
I
heard
would
this.
I had just
Yeah.
He
heard
read about
this.
this in Fortune magazine, right? It's just
In fact, I wish I would have known earlier. I only found out because Ross got caught, right? So the FBI had this whole sting operation. Ross got brought in and essentially brought down this like huge empire that had been built off of the back of Bitcoin. And I would say this was a miss for me because at the time, like I was fascinated by the power of Bitcoin, right? Like how far this guy had gotten, like how well used this currency had been, how much commerce had gone through it. And I didn't do anything about it. I just thought, let me try making a movie about this guy, but didn't think about the potential of Bitcoin. And then it kind of fell off my radar until it came, I think DZ probably around the same time it came on yours, where it became a much more legitimate product where you had companies like Coinbase that were trading Bitcoin.
Totally.
And it started being treated more like a stock. But I'd say that early on, I saw the power of Bitcoin as a currency, which I think actually ironically has been lost. Right. I don't think it really acts like that. I don't think people are really using it for transactions. And again, these were illicit transactions. There's a reason. But I would say like that initial fascination is probably not the case for most people anymore.
This brings back so many memories, right? Because I remember prior to 2018, I think you bring up a good point. Like I learned about this before 2018 for sure, right? But everything I learned up to that point was like Mount Gox, people getting scammed, buying drugs, the dark web. And it was just like, like it didn't have enough legitimacy for me to want to get into it, basically.
Yeah, I think it delegitimized it for me. I think by the time like 2018 came around, I was like, wait, this is the same thing that was used for drugs. Like this is not going anywhere, right? Until the purpose changed, right? It became an investment vehicle rather than a transaction.
Store of value. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of what happened to OnlyFans.
Yeah, exactly.
A third trend we should discuss this week.
That's right. Ahmad, so tell us your story. How did you come to learn about this? Where are you with it?
Okay, I'm going to start it by saying I'm sorry, Samir's mom and Samir's coworkers, for the.
No need to apologize. Just tell us the story.
It's very similar to Avi's story. I'm going to take you back to the days where I was in college, college is a crazy place. And
wow.
Listen, man.
Look, I had a friend who was.
I'm glad you had a friend.
It was always a friend.
Well, yeah.
100. It's always
It's
always a friend.
I had a friend who was buying and buying drugs in the mail. Super sketchy operation. Would find someone on the dark web, buy it in mail, and then have it sent to this guy's house. And this person explained to me that the way that he paid for things was with Bitcoin, and I didn't know what Bitcoin was. And then he was a little bit different though. He was a proponent of Bitcoin, like one of these guys are like, if you happen to like run into them in the hallway, they'll like chirp your ear up for an hour and a half about why Bitcoin is better. You should put all your money in Bitcoin and stop putting your money in anything else. Sent me like the paper by Satoshi something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I read the paper, thought it was really interesting. And by the way, do you want me to give my opinions on the matter or just like the story?
Both.
Please,
course.
fine.
Great. The thing that I always have a hard time believing, I'm not a diehard Bitcoin person for what it's worth. The thing that I've always gotten hung up on is since man threw sticks, the currency has always been defined by government organizations. And I find it just highly unbelievable that that will ever change. Even if money is a digital currency.
We have a
Hey,
skeptic.
youngin, how could you think that, man?
I know, right?
Like, what would you of all people should think
Right?
the opposite?
Exactly. Stick it to the man.
I'm
the
not saying
people.
I'm not saying it's right, by the way. I do think I think if Bitcoin could actually be implemented in the world, it would do a lot of good, especially for like countries like I have a lot of friends who are Lebanese, and they got wrecked, right? Like money that was worth like, I don't know, $1 million is now worth like 30 grand. I don't know if it was that bad, but you get my point. Like money that they've worked for all their life is now worth nothing because of a few political people who just like burned the economy down to the ground. And so I think if Bitcoin were truly widely accepted, like it'd be great for the world because the money you make is the money you keep, and it's the true value of it based on like what the what the world thinks about it. But at the end of the day, your government, like the land you sit on, is still owned by and run by a government entity that will ultimately decide what is a acceptable tender at
For such a cool young guy, you're such a rule stickler. What's going on, Ahmad?
Exactly.
This is
I was
like,
surprised, especially because look, especially like let's just take that argument. Let me play devil's advocate for a second on that argument, Ahmad, which is, you're arguing that people are bound to their geography at least in some ways, right?
I'm saying people are bound to the governments that are responsible for that geography. But yes.
Okay. Yes. People are bound to the governments responsible for geography. But I think the opposing narrative would be, how bound are we today to geography? Right. Within reason, obviously we live in the US and, we operate in, openly with a certain number of countries, but like, I feel that tie to a specific location, for an entire life, where everything is tied to that location, that feels like it's going away. Like I'm much more mobile today than I think my parents were, and they were more mobile than their parents.
I have 3 things to talk about that hopefully will lead to
Teach us, Samir.
Stuff here.
Okay.
I think in terms of trends, DZ, you started us off like, what should PMs think about? I think one of the things that even if you just cap the discussion of what we talked about right now, one of the things we all mentioned was at some point this was a joke to us, and then it became substantial.
And not that, and especially not that long ago. It's not like
not that long ago.
Yeah, when we're like 5 years old, there was a joke. Well, except for Ahmad.
So, but also, not all of us went to MIT, but all of us are reasonably smart people.
Reasonable.
And we all, at some point we all thought this ain't it, but then to a large extent this became quite big. So I think there's one part which is it's really hard to tell when something goes from zero to hero, so to speak.
Yep.
And amongst a sea of things that are zero, it's hard to tell that one particular thing. Now, a lot of the diehard fans will tell you, of course they saw it, but then that's sort of survivor bias, because a lot of diehard fans will tell you that something's going to go to, go big. And then if it does, then in retrospect, they're right. So I think one of these challenges is like the challenges of recognizing what's going to go from toy to trend, or, to get to scale. The second thing is, I think the use cases, think back to PM, the use cases, what Bitcoin serves right now have evolved and therefore become more valuable, right? From Avi and Ahmad, not them, of course. Not them, friends buying things, not them.
Someone they know,
right? Yeah, not them, of course, right? But their friends buying things that their parents would be proud of, to what today is essentially digital gold, or gold in the cloud, or whatever you want to call it. Gold, not physical gold, but some store value in digital terms. That use case has evolved and therefore become more valuable. Yep. And then the third thing I'll say is, if you look at a lot of the discussions now around blockchain, but also around like some of the popular coins, Bitcoin itself in some cases, they're thinking about it as a platform, right? As a platform,
a computing platform,
more in Ethereum, but like, they're thinking about it as a platform and as a use for not beyond just currency, and that's where that could even take the trend and the value of it even higher. So
let's go through each of these.
I definitely want to take issue with the second one, right? Like, and I think the third one is actually where things become critical. We can go through each of them one by one.
Let's go through one by one, because I think that was a good way. That was a great layout. Great job, Samir. Great way to sort of structure.
Thank you, DZ. Means a lot coming from you, actually.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yes. Okay. Look. So here's the thing. Like, let's take my story as an example. But we actually heard this a few times. I think Avi, you said something similar, which was like, this thing in 2015, sure, like who knows, right? Like you said, that was really in the 0 days of this trend, right? Like really, it was the Wild West. So figuring out that this was going to be a hero in 2015, unless you had real foresight or real belief, is very difficult to do, right? But then several of us re-engaged with this thing in late 2018, right? By which time it had 15x. So, in a weird way, the signs were there, right? The signals were there. Like when something 15x is in the real world, it's hard to 15x anything in the real world without some intrinsic value, right? At that scale, right? So I feel like maybe that's one of the lessons here is that, like, short picking things up at the very, very beginnings of an S curve, you have to have real foresight or have real belief and conviction, but you don't need to. You can just wait 5 years or 3 years and then see how that trend chart looks. And then you're still early. So 2018 would have still, I would argue today even, you would still have been early in this cycle, but you had de-risked it considerably because you waited and you just waited for the data point to come out.
I want to challenge
something.
Oh yeah, please go for it, Ahmad.
So, by the way, I know I just gave a bear argument. I'll give a bull argument for a second. I think the foreign transactions, like the total market size of foreign transactions is like 6.6 trillion, right? And if you argue that maybe like, I don't know, a majority of foreign transactions use cases could be replaced by something like Bitcoin, I'd argue you're still early, if that's the belief that you have. And, as someone who uses Bitcoin not for like, I don't know, anything other than like financial gains, unlike Samir, I buy low and I sell high.
Hey,
I'd say
I'm
now's a great time to
buddy.
invest. Now's a great time to invest.
I want to argue another point for a second, which is I will argue kind of the point that I was originally making, but I'll take it further, that I think Bitcoin has become less useful over time, but more valuable. I would say that
Interesting.
I would say that nothing has been proven by Bitcoin. There is nothing you can do today with Bitcoin that you can't do other ways, as I would say as cheaply or as easily, right? Like I don't think there are any use cases that are exclusive to Bitcoin. I want you guys to prove me wrong. And I would argue that in the early 2010s, where you could buy things off the Silk Road, it was far more useful than it was today as an actual currency. I think if you look at Samir's framework, I think two actually hasn't happened, that Bitcoin has increased in value but decreased in use. And that if that third point about cryptocurrency in general or blockchain becoming a platform doesn't happen, I would say that there actually is no S curve, that you have a solution looking for a problem, but that you have scarcity, right? So I think the one thing that Bitcoin in particular or cryptocurrencies have gotten right is they've created scarcity, but I think that most people can't actually name a use for them.
Wait. So let's start with one use case. So I think your argument here, Avi, is that which I think we could not dispute, is that all the use cases of Bitcoin have other solutions, right?
Yeah.
But specifically in the use case of store of value, do you feel like that Bitcoin is a superior solution? And the only reason it's superior is because baked into the code is the inability to create more liquidity. Like the liquidity is capped, unlike, the Argentinian, what's the Argentinian currency? I can't remember, but you know my point.
Yes,
right?
yes, you can't deflate it. But
You can't
so
deflate
did
it.
gold had that too, right? Gold still has that, right? So we have other stores of currency that are finite. Now the fact that this is
you
a
got to
digital,
like store chunks of metal somewhere.
yes, and so
right?
but is that really a problem, right? Like where
man,
people,
it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Where you
Store
gonna
value is a huge problem. Yes.
Where are you gonna store?
but I mean, we for instance, we've tied currency to gold before, right? So like
Mhm.
in some ways, we've solved this problem by saying the dollar is tied to the.
It's
You
not-
actually
it's
have to
not
have
the
a supply
case.
of
But
gold.
then the Fed can just print $2 trillion of currency without overhead, right?
Okay,
Right,
so I'd
right.
say like maybe we've altered the ability to deflate, and we've done so in a digital way, right? So
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
fair enough.
So
like
it's
so we've created
easy
a
to
store.
transfer, right? I like to say bluntly, if I need to get on a flight today and flee the US, I can carry a thumb drive with me and my Bitcoin, right? And I can go somewhere else in the world and liquidate this thing if I want.
Sure,
Right.
kind of. But first of all, that's very unsafe. If you lose the thumb drive by
That's true.
Bitcoin,
That's
right?
true.
So
That's
that's
true.
pretty dangerous.
Yes.
So there's inefficiencies there. Second of all, the actual transaction costs for Bitcoin are pretty high these days.
Also
So
true.
it's not that easy just to simply transfer. And
Whoa.
okay, prove me wrong
Samir.
here.
No. Okay, but actually, I do want to say, Avi, your point is excellent.
Yeah, you have a very good point.
Yeah,
We're
your
just
point
trying
is
to pick
excellent.
apart the
Your
bad parts.
point is actually, if you look at the things that Bitcoin uniquely solved,
or was supposed to
I
solve.
actually, sorry, go ahead.
Or was supposed to solve.
Or we're supposed to, yeah. But yes, supposed to for sure. And then even practically solve, like buying stuff off, illicit marketplaces. I think from that perspective, yes, it has become less useful in a number of use cases it could uniquely do. However, I think it has indexed onto one of the use cases that has proved it to be valid. So one way to think about this is it went from like a use case where it was uniquely valuable, but that use case itself was quite limited in scale because not a lot of people are doing this, to
Buying drugs online.
buying drugs. Right.
Okay.
None of us here do it, right? Yeah.
Definitely not.
To a
Sorry,
use
Samir's
case
mom.
where to maybe even a narrower use case.
Not
of, like,
narrower,
store
right?
value.
I would argue I would argue store value is a very broad use case.
No.
Yeah, it's probably the
broadly
broadest use case.
applicable.
Oh,
No,
okay, got it.
broadly
Yes.
applicable.
Yes.
Like you can't buy blah 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 illicit, but you could store value. It's a narrower use case in that it's one use case, whatever,
Yes.
but it's shared by a gazillion. This is that if you go back to that like value proposition thing, it's like
Yes.
super high coverage and
Exactly.
super high value.
Yeah, half the planet at some point will want
right.
to store
Right.
value safely. I mean, I agree. I agree with your argument that like there's lots of aspects of storing value that Bitcoin actually makes worse.
Yeah.
Right. It's actually worse than gold. It's actually worse than a dollar in several different ways. But then there are a few elements of Bitcoin with regards to store value that are legitimately better. And I think people are still trying to figure out that trade-off between like the things I'm sacrificing with the dollar versus the thing I'm gaining with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, like if Bitcoin sold for scarcity alone, that might be enough in terms of store value, right? Like that might be
Seems
enough
to be so far,
justify-
right?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that like there's a fundamental misunderstanding of cryptocurrency, blockchain, Bitcoin, and that a lot of the investment you see is actually a result of people feeling some sort of FOMO, which again
Totally.
is not a
Yeah.
bad thing. But I don't think people are actually saying that this is the future of computing. Therefore, I'm going to buy Bitcoin.
I think future of computing, more people are gravitating towards other coins.
Yes.
But I see what I mean. Yeah, it hasn't proven out the other use cases yet. So to
Yes.
speak, right? Yeah.
And your point
Yeah.
stands. In fact, the other use cases from the early days of Bitcoin have eroded or largely gone away, right? You're left with like one use case for
Yes.
Bitcoin itself.
I think the thing I'm most interested in, right? Like the reason I do remain like really engaged here is because of the rest of the use cases. I don't think they've proven themselves yet. I think they have the potential to. I think like things like smart contracts have the ability to change tons of businesses, right? The idea of like smart escrows are fascinating, but I think to me, like I'm really waiting for the next few years to see if that actually happens or not, right? Are those vitamin problems or painkiller problems as we discussed the other week? And do we need these solutions, right? Are these painful enough?
The world needs Bitcoin, man. The world needs Ethereum.
Samir
The
needs
world
more
needs
people
it
to buy
all.
Bitcoin to
Yeah,
recoup his
we got a
losses
hype
in
man
Bitcoin.
up right here.
I'm not
That's what
sitting
this
on a
is about.
loss here, guys. I don't know where this meme's coming from. I wish I bought 2017. I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin. I wish I bought more. Didn't you wish you bought more?
Oh no,
Totally.
totally. And by the way, like in terms of like an investment, oh, I wish I had bought more, right?
Right?
Like yes, 100%.
Yeah.
But like, do I think there's use protecting my investment? No. Right? Like, but that's not needed necessarily. I think what I'm taking issue with is the idea that like value equals use. I think in this case you see a big disconnect between that.
Well, actually, you're not even arguing that. Just to be very clear, you're not even arguing that the usage has declined. You're arguing that the use cases has declined.
The use case.
Yeah,
I
Right?
think
use cases.
yeah.
So there's one
yeah.
use case left, but it's shared
Yes.
by many more people. But
Exactly.
it started with a small number of people, many more use cases.
Yes.
Broad and
Okay.
shallow. Yeah,
Yeah.
broad and shallow. Now it's narrow and
Yeah,
you know,
so they
very-
changed the game
very-
on you. Like you bought in thinking this is
But-
something different, and then one day you woke up and found it turned out to be, gold with some weirdness.
But
think
like, is store of value a use case for stocks?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so then yes, then I think that's a valid use case.
I think
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about what you're saying, Avi, which by the way is a very fantastic point, just to add to it, is if everyone in the world also saw just that the only use case was to store value, what would that actually do to the value of Bitcoin? Because I think
It will
I
go
think-
up, right?
Yes.
yeah. So you're saying like if everybody in the world thought that the only use case was to store value,
Yes.
right? Like that's it. That's the only thing that it'll ever do
Th-
forever. You think the value of Bitcoin would go up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Think about treasuries. Think about the U.S. Treasuries market. Like
That's
that's
exactly it, yes.
entirely about. This only solves one thing.
The-
But like, I'll look up the numbers real quick. What you guys talking on?
well, there's these stats on like how much debt there is, how much debt there is that's basically negative yield debt, like bonds that are just negative yield, and that's basically people trying to preserve value in a very inefficient way. If people realize that Bitcoin was worth, or Bitcoin equals store of value, they would see a shift in Bitcoin. We would all see a shift in Bitcoin. And I think this is actually a really useful like product principle too, which is when you go from potentially a lot of use cases with shallow usage in each to like one use case with like dominant usefulness or applicability or understanding of that use case, that clarity drives more value. Actually,
Yes.
Avi, you brought up a really good point, because I didn't consider this. Like part of the values comes from the crystallization or understanding of what use it's serving now.
What about store of value to use? Right? Like for instance, like if something is a store of value, but there's significant friction to spending or trading. Like for instance, like how easy is it to buy a pizza with your Bitcoin?
Terrible. But you wouldn't use that for
And
use
never
case, right?
buy a pizza with your Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
By the way, I don't think that argument just as one data point.
Yeah.
There's about $22 trillion of outstanding U.S. Treasuries, right? Which have
Yeah.
very low yield, but one of the reasons people buy them is because the U.S. government is not going to go out of business, and tomorrow I can come back and get dollars for it,
Yep.
or I can get trade it, right?
But-
and you can't buy
DZ
pizza with this thing either, right? Like nobody's buying pizza with U.S. Treasuries, right?
But if everybody in the world just thought of this thing as a way to plant their money, right? Like
Yes.
same thing with the U.S. Treasury, right? The returns would also be like the U.S. Treasury.
But it could take over. So think about all the things people today to try to store value safely: gold, treasuries, land. I mean, we can argue how much of this. There's a lot of arguments here to make, but I would argue the market size.
Yeah.
The need
Yes.
for store value is 100 trillion. It's some
Yeah.
2 orders of
Yeah.
magnitude higher,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So if everyone
right.
decided, hey, this is a better way to do that because like you can't deflate it, it's insured at the level of code, which do you want something backed by code? Or do you want something backed by the U.S. government? That's a different debate, but it's secured in a different way.
That's right.
Like even if half of the world's use case for store value transferred on Bitcoin, the price would go up 100-fold, right?
That's right. And because of its inherent deflationary nature, or
Or non-deflationary nature, right?
Well, non-inflationary.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Non-inflationary. Yes.
Because there's a cap on the number of coins, as others continue to print, I mean, your value is stored in relative terms to whatever you're going to ultimately trade it into, when that use case becomes dominant.
It's interesting that you guys. I wonder how much of this is so far. So we're not going to get to the China discussion today, which is totally fine. I'm glad we dug deep into this because I feel like we found some product learnings here. But it's interesting that your guys' perception of the value intrinsic to the ability to store value was actually relatively low when we started this conversation.
No, I
Right.
thought it was
I mean,
huge.
For,
No,
for,
no,
for what it's
zero.
worth,
Huge.
but for what it's worth,
Ahmad,
I said I compared it to the foreign transaction market, and I said if you imagined it as like the foreign transaction market, and you went even beyond that, right? I said you should invest.
Yeah.
I think the thing I'm trying to say is once it gets closer to that whatever number you spit out, right? It's like 100 trillion. That's when, in my opinion, the returns are less favorable than
Sure.
anything else that you.
Oh, sure.
can
I mean, at
Sure.
some point you
But
saturate
right
the
now
market,
they're
right? But-
favorable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, last time we like renamed the little Zoom screens here. Can we rename Ahmad's to be the oldest young guy? Because that's what
Totally,
he is, right? He's the
100%.
oldest young guy I know. What is this
100%.
guy doing? No Bitcoin. I'm just
Yeah.
But for what it's
here's-
worth, I'm actually heavily invested in Bitcoin and Ethereum.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing I find so interesting about that observation from Avi and Ahmad, which is when I think about the problem of being able to store value safely, there's like not that many human problems that go back to the beginning of humanity, right? And this is one of them, right? Like this. I mean, Ahmad, what you had a weird quote, like "since man threw sticks." I don't even know why that
Since
makes
man
any
threw
sense.
sticks. I guess the better way of saying it, since man invented money, it's been a thing.
Prior to man inventing money, storing of value was also a problem, right? Literally,
That's true.
anytime you can
You have to
create-
like save your
like-
grain or save.
no,
your
yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Fair
At any
point.
point when you could create more than you could consume, which is relatively early, which is a good thing, by the way. If you think about humans, that's how we became who we are as a species. But like at some point, you could create more than you can consume. At that instant, storage of value became a problem.
Easy has gone to first principles of human history.
I'm
This
just
is-
saying, it's weird. It's weird that like the perception of storage of value is not valuable. That was weird. I was surprised. To hear that.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm going to be curious here. Why is that do you guys have problems with storage of value today?
Well,
Like,
I think
are you?
once- Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
Can I go?
No, go
Sorry.
ahead. Are you saying like, hey, do we have a problem where there's like dollars floating around and we're trying to like store them and the bank's not good? No. We
Well,
we
like,
don't
are
have
they
that.
actively and okay, like, are your dollars? Yeah, like,
Inflating?
what is the problem? It's inflation.
Yes.
It's
Like, that's what we're
I
trying to
think-
fight against here.
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, like look, it's if you think about balance, like one way to think about it is everything in the stock market. There's a lot of people I know who are like everything in the stock market, that's it, right? Or
Yeah.
and then you think about like, oh well, there's real estate. And you think about a diversified portfolio.
Yes.
Nah, I sound like the old person, right? But like, why is it not all in meme stocks, right? But if you think about a diversified portfolio, having some, of your money or your value stored in a place where it's not going to go up a lot and not going to go down a lot
Yes.
is a useful,
What,
That's right.
but hold on.
is a useful part of that portfolio mix.
But let me pause you there.
Yeah.
Are we describing the same Bitcoin?
No. So the volatility.
Oh
kills
yeah, the
argument, right?
volatility.
Okay,
I
so
mean-
volatility. So you're not talking about volatility necessarily.
No. I think the ideal version of this thing is not volatile. So
Yeah.
like the ideal store of value is not so volatile, right?
Okay.
Like
I
it
think what
it's
he's
more
trying to say is ideally it stops becoming volatile after he makes a lot of money.
predictable. Exactly.
But
Please
that's the
10x
thing.
and then stop.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Stop
Yeah.
swinging.
but I think that's what I'm getting at here, right? Like, is the reason people are getting in because it keeps going up,
I think
right? Like,
Hard to tell, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
That is why
yeah, I
I'm
mean, I
getting in.
yeah,
personally.
no, but
I'm not-
Full disclosure.
but just to be
Like,
clear, like
the moment
like,
it's stable, I'm out. Just a
Yeah.
heads up.
yeah. No, but think about it this way. There are different instruments available for short-term storage of value preservation and long-term storage of value preservation.
Yeah.
Like if you think about like if you need cash tomorrow, the best way to store
Don't
it
buy
is cash.
Bitcoin.
Yeah,
exactly. Yes,
it's,
yes,
it's cash.
exactly.
Right?
Don't, if you
If
need
you
to buy
need it-
pizza, this is not it.
Yeah,
Don't,
if
don't
you
store your
need
value.
if you need to store value for the next year, like whatever, maybe I'm making it like there's a U.S. Treasury that'll store value relatively,
Sure.
whatever.
But if you want to store something for 20 years, 10 years,
Yeah, and that's I think one of the biggest criticisms of Bitcoin too. It hasn't proven itself
that's right. That's
over
right.
the long term.
And that's
one of the
one thing the
things is-
dollar has, right? So the dollar has several
And
hundred
gold
years at this
has.
point and gold has,
Yeah.
right?
And so one of the speculative things about Bitcoin is that it's being touted as a long-term storage value despite not being around for a
That's
long
the
term.
best counter argument.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, this is fascinating. I did not even know half this stuff when we started.
So I've been waiting to give this point because I gave it to you guys over text.
yeah,
A couple
I've
weeks
been
ago.
waiting for this point too.
And you
Oh wait,
completely-
you
yeah,
texted
what was
us
the point?
something during this
I
thing?
did. I
Right
texted
now?
you something a long time ago and you completely ignored it. Bitcoin advocate.
Oh, probably
Okay.
I
did.
said-
Why don't you
Tell us.
tell us now.
I-
Tell us now.
I told you my read in my ear to the ground with Gen Z is that Gen Z does not
Oh,
F
Yeah.
with Bitcoin.
Get this guy
cryptocurrency.
off. Get this guy
Yeah.
off the screen.
Who
What
is
are you
this guy?
talking about?
Like, who
Gen Z
is this
doesn't
guy?
care.
because
And-
of the
Because it's so bad for the environment. And
Uh-huh.
I have the text pulled up so I can read it out. So
Ahmad,
And-
would
and
you
by
name
the-
your source?
no, I can't. You know,
Okay,
gotta stay
tell us
public.
about
By the way, you know, with all the viewers we have, I'm sure this next stat I give is probably going to crash my value of Bitcoin. You know, with all the 60 viewers we've got, but fuck
You're
it.
just gonna bleep it out.
Bleep it out.
But this is, but even Ahmad, even this story is interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
like, if what we're arguing for is all these other utilities and use cases of Bitcoin evaporated, and what you're left with is store value, and you happen to just naturally have more value to store when you get older, right? So, you know, there's this interesting observation that people have made that like people all start off as Democrats and they turn 40 and they become Republicans. Like, I wonder if your sources for this information will change their tune
Okay, let
when
him
they
say.
have
Yeah,
value.
that's a good point.
No.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point, DZ. That's a good point.
I have a thought there, but let me say the stat first, and then I'll give you my sense there. So a single Bitcoin transaction uses the same amount of power that an average American household consumes in an entire month, and is
That's
responsible
crazy.
for roughly 1 million times more carbon emissions than a single Visa transaction.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to turn my light off to reduce the power consumption of my house.
Okay,
So-
one of our pod
so
listeners who
I-
knows more
yeah.
than we do. Please
DZ, turn
fact
your
check
lights
this.
off. Turn your lights
I'll
off,
send you.
DZ.
I'll send you the article. I have it. You know, I linked you the article when I think I sent it. So just a heads up.
Oh,
I
we can do the
fact-checked
math here though.
myself.
Like the amount of power a house uses in a month is like in the
Crazy.
megawatts.
1 million times more carbon emissions than a single Visa transaction. Think about how many Visa transactions there are.
Look, is this fake news or is this real? I don't know.
Oh my gosh. All
I
right,
don't know.
Oh,
And-
okay,
and
here's
then-
here's the
and
here's
then-
the number. Here's the number. So what we're saying, I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, I'm turning my
So,
light back on. It's
If it
dark.
uses the same amount of power as a house in a month, we're talking about 900 kilowatts. Right? Okay, I
So-
don't think you guys have a firm reference for what a kilowatt is, but we'll put in the show notes. All I'm saying is like I think it feels unbelievable.
Ahmad's point is generally right though, which
But
is
this point is generally right. Yeah.
yeah, which is there are a lot of environmental concerns.
Yeah.
It recently tanked the value of Bitcoin was one of the reasons why Bitcoin fell from 64,000 down to 28,000 not too long ago. Now it's creeped back up to 48,000. But Ahmad's right. There are unsolved environmental concerns about the use of Bitcoin. And, you know, I think I'm really hoping that problem gets solved so that the price can continue to go up. Tell us more,
So-
Ahmad.
So let me finish up my thing because I want to leave you with something. If you park your money in Bitcoin, you're basically taking a knife to the planet and stabbing it.
Oh, but only if you
Right, so-
transact though, right? If you just leave
Who's
it in there.
transacting?
Yeah.
I mean, if you transact, right? But if you're buying and selling and buying and
no.
selling,
Well, who's doing this? I'm
they-
saying most of us, again, if it's just a store value utility, right? It goes in. You take it out very rarely. It's like a treasury. Like how often do you sell treasuries, right?
right. I'm just giving you full disclosure.
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Fair enough.
The second thing I was going to say, and this I think goes to your point, DZ. I don't think the boomers were like Bitcoin. Like put all your money in Bitcoin. It was
Yeah.
definitely like the next generation and millennials specifically, right? And I think this next generation. And by the way, I think a lot of the hype around Bitcoin. I don't think we even touched on this theme, and I think this is like something for PMs to think about as they build products. Is like I think the hype is about taking something that's in the physical world and bring it into a virtual world.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the hype, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this next generation is all about that.
Yeah.
All about.
Mm-mm.
And if they don't fuck with Bitcoin, should you?
Yes.
It's a great point.
Because we're the ones who brought it in the value, right? It is the next generation, which like really value the environment because we dealt them a bunch of bad cards.
Now,
Um,
Ahmad, if you
Are they
show
go-
your wallet more, we'll be able to read your credit card number on the air, and you don't want that to happen. So
yeah,
it makes
Okay.
it
point.
easier for us to buy Bitcoin off.
Speaking of transacting,
Yeah.
Samir, we got to wrap. We got to wrap. So this is great though. I feel like we got pretty deep into this. I feel like
this
we
is
put some
great.
learning.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do this again. Let's do this again. There's other trends I want us to dig into and really think about.
Yeah.
Both for their immediate product learnings and also because I think, if you're kind of on the wrong side of these trends, don't be on the wrong side of these trends is the point. Don't
Yeah.
be late to the mobile game. Okay. in our usual fashion, let's do carve-outs and then we'll wrap.
Okay, I'll go first. The world has always been a dangerous and messy place. Recent events have, made that clear yet again. And so I, of course, like I'm very sad about what's going on, and the counterpart about that is I'm also feeling very blessed about the security and stability that I enjoy on a day-to-day basis. And I think gratitude is what is my carve out for the day, which is it is so easy to lose sight of the basic I can get food, water, safety, and shelter. I need to remind myself every day that is one of the rarest to have all whatever 4 or 5 of those things stably is a lottery ticket. Is really, that's been won. So gratitude.
100.
Can I go next? Because I think I have something that's actually kind of relevant or related to that. And I might be repeating myself at this point. Honestly, I got to remember all the things that have been top of my mind last week's. But there's this meditation in Stoicism called "You Live the Dream Life," and it's a way of reminding yourself that to be grateful. Everything that you have, someone is dreaming about it and wishing that they had those things. And something that's been on my mind a lot is how do you balance the half glass full versus half glass empty in your life, so that way you can push yourself to be better and achieve more, but still being grateful about it. So that's something that's been on mine. I feel like it complemented what Samir said. So
I love that. I'll go next with these. You can take us out.
Okay.
So big news in my life where we're moving from LA to Atlanta, which you guys know, but the pod doesn't. So we're in the process of packing up our life and literally putting everything in the boxes. But it just strikes me almost on a daily basis how much change comes with these positive feelings and these really negative, like anxious feelings. Like change is both very exciting, but also really terrifying. And that we're wired as humans to experience both with change. And ultimately, change in my life has always led to good things. But like in the moment, it's super scary. And so I've just been kind of embracing that, where it's like, it's nice to kind of look over the edge of a cliff every once in a while and be scared and excited.
That's a great one.
All the best with the move, man.
Yeah.
That's big news.
Also, just briefly on that, like, I think it speaks to like sometimes you want to follow that feeling, right? Like that feeling is a signal. It's a clue in some ways, and you want to follow it.
Totally.
Okay, I'll do one quick one and take us out. I love the starting one, Samir, around gratitude. Dan Shapiro, he's the CEO of LinkedIn. He's doing this short video series on LinkedIn.
It's so good.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's great. I texted you about it this week.
He's fantastic. Yeah. So one of the ones he did recently was about feedback. So next week we had to do annual reviews. I had to give this to my team. I'm making one as well. And it just reminded me, and I thought it was so on point that I just want to share with the pod. He basically said, feedback is never about making yourself feel better, right? Feedback is always about helping this person, which like seems really obvious, right? Like that should not be something we had to talk about. But I can recall a number of times when I was hurt and I wanted to get feedback, and I'm pretty sure the feedback did not have the effect that I thought it was going to have, simply because my motivation for that feedback wasn't right. So I just love that. So feedback is about helping, not about making yourself feel better.
I love that. Future guests of the pod potentially.
That's for people listening for feedback, listening or giving feedback and listening to feedback, right? Sometimes people are giving you feedback because they want you to be better, and you're taking it the wrong way.
So he had he has a whole series. His other short clip that's relevant here was, when getting feedback, the feedback is always between 1% and 100% accurate, right? Somewhere between. So can you find the truth in the feedback? Can you make that truth useful to you? Can you sort of look between, what the person is saying? And can you not react to it kind of in a very emotional, primitive sense? Anyhow, so yes, we should find Dan and talk to him. He's a very smart guy, great guy. So thank you guys. So much fun. Learn a ton.
So much fun.
This is great. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Later.
Bye.